Hi again, Captain Peter Cuttsy with another of my online briefings. Today we'll be speaking on the loss of both engine-driven generators. What you're seeing on the screen now is a PowerPoint and a picture of what you'd actually see if you lost both engine-driven generators. So let's go to the recognition. Uh, the recognition of such would be you would have both transfer bus off lights illuminated, as reflected here, both source off lights illuminated, and the gen off bus lights illuminated. And a note, very important, is at high altitude, thrust deterioration may occur and you may end up flaming out on one or both engines. Fuel pumps, you have low pressure lights on. You forward and aft, and also center tank fuel pumps. So they are inoperative, which means that you're going to be using the suction feed. And that's one reason that you could end up with flameouts at high altitudes. Anti-ice protection. The captain side, captain's pitot, left elevator pitot, left alpha vane, and temperature probe are inoperative. The first officers are operative. So, and there's an overheat light up here also, and temperature zone lights and dual bleed light is on. So in the hydraulic pump area, you've lost both electrically driven hydraulic pumps, although you have both engines operating, and you will have both engine-driven hydraulic pumps operative. So you still have hydraulics. Manual trim is required because your trim is normally powered by one of the AC transfer buses, and at this particular point in time, both the main AC transfer buses are inoperative or unpowered. So it's going to require manual trimming. So immediately the pilot flying, of course, is going to be the captain, and we're going to see that soon. Why? Because the first officer loses all his flight instrumentation. So if he or she has control, should give control to the captain, and the captain will fly the aircraft using his or her flight instruments. Remember that before you use manual trim, ensure the stab, trim, cutout switches, both of them are off. And again, if you do restore power later, ensure that you stow the handles before turning the stab, trim, cutout switches back on again. So that's something that's not really written in any book. Standby instruments available? Yes, they are. And the upper ICAS is available, upper DU, I should say, is available in a compacted form. Some buses restored. Now, if you do get some buses back, you will actually see this indicating that you've got electrical power on both AC transfer buses. Now, that's just a little overview. Let's have a look at what is available, the available instruments on standby power. The captain's outboard display unit with PFD, the captain's inboard display unit with ND, and certain configurations, of course, depending on your aircraft and when you purchased it. Clocks are available, left EFIS control panel, standby instruments, RMI, standby airspeed, altimeter, standby attitude director, and standby magnetic compass. Now you can see the reason why the captain should be flying the aircraft. Your aircraft may have 1 or 2 batteries. Remember that on a single battery, you have 30 minutes of standby power. In other words, after 30 minutes, if you haven't restored power on the standby or on the AC transfer buses and all other buses, you're going to have problems. So you want to be heading towards an airport and prepare directly to an airport and to the nearest suitable airport. If you have dual batteries, you're good for up to 60 minutes of standby power. Now, hopefully, the power interruption, or there probably was a power interruption, and you will be able to restore all of your buses. But this is a demonstration only in the simulator. And if I was your instructor, and your instructor will brief you on the fact of this will be a demo only. Now, so these 2 items are important. Now, remember that every time that you go to start the APU, you are going to drain the battery. There is a figure given of approximately 6 minutes of battery power is lost each time you attempt to start the APU. So be careful. Also, every time you push VHF1, which is the only VHF operating under these circumstances, you will also bleed the stored power of that battery. So use the VHF judiciously. And if you're going to start the APU, you want to do it as soon as possible. Follow the checklist. There is a note that you may not get the APU started until you're at flight level 260 or below. That's may. We'll look at that later. All right. So let's have a look at what the operative systems are. So standby power, once you've lost both generators, as far as the air system is concerned, you have the air conditioning pack valves are operable, bleed trip off lights are working, manual pressurization control is working, so you may have to control the cabin manually. The altitude warning horn is working, and pack lights. Let's have a look at the anti-ice. The captain's probe heater on certain aircraft is operating, just certain aircraft. Communications. Flight interphone system is working. Passenger address system is working, and as I mentioned before, VHF number 1. Emergency systems, your standby compass light is operative. A white dome lights, emergency instrument floodlights, flight crew oxygen, and passenger oxygen. They're working. Engine and APU, the upper display unit, N1, EGT, N2, fuel flow, fuel quantity, oil pressure, oil temp, oil quantity, and vibrations are all on the upper DU, and the following 5 are in a compacted form. Thrust reversers are operable, starter valves also, right igniters, and the APU operation start attempts not recommended above 25,000 feet. And I mentioned that already. Remember, every time you try, you're draining your battery by a considerable amount, and you don't want to do that. In the fire system, you have APU and engine fire extinguishing bottles, APU and engine fire detection system, cargo fire extinguisher bottle on certain aircraft, and cargo fire extinguisher bottles on certain aircraft. Fuel. Crossfeed valve is working. The engine fuel shutoff valves are operable. Spar fuel shutoff valves operable. Fuel crossfeed valve, or I should say the fuel valve closed lights operational, and the fuel quantity indicators are operational. The FMC, left FMC, certain configurations, left CDU, certain configurations, heading and track indications, VHF nav1, ILS nav1, and left IRS. Left GPS, marker beacon, ADF1, transponder 1, DME1 on certain configurations. You can see the importance here for the captain having control of the aircraft. Hydraulics. The engine-driven shutoff valves are operative, and the standby rudder shutoff valves also are operable. Landing gear. The inboard anti-skid system, anti-skid and op light, parking brake, air and ground system, and landing gear indicator lights all operable. And lastly, in the warning system, stall warning system is functioning, oral warnings, and master caution light recall. Now, many of these items under the warning and other systems are off the directly off the hot battery bus or the battery bus itself. Let's now go to QRH reference. The QRH is quite lengthy, and you have to go through it step by step. And remember, follow the instructions that Boeing have recommended, and I have done a video on how to read a non-normal checklist. So it's quite lengthy, and it can be confusing, and you've got to do it step by step. So what I have done for this briefing is I've broken all of this down into scenarios. Scenario 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I've color highlighted the areas that we're going to talk about. So the captain will have control of the aircraft and be flying the airplane, and he will call for the applicable checklist, loss of both engine-driven generators checklist, and the Gen 1 transfer bus off, Gen 1 and 2, I should say, Gen 1 and 2 source off lights, as we have seen already, and Gen 1 and 2 gen off bus lights illuminated. The condition, both engine-driven generators are off. This is read by the pilot monitoring. And a note, at high altitude, thrust deterioration or engine flameout can occur. So you have to be able to identify whether you've lost both engines or whether you've just lost both generators. And remember, the upper ICAS has the engine instruments compressed, so therefore you will know whether it's a generator, dual generator loss, or a dual engine loss, which it would be a scenario of losing all your flight instruments, similar to a loss of both generators. Today, we're only speaking of a loss of both generators with both engines operating. Both engines operating. Read the checklist. For engine gen switches both on, one at a time. And the pilot monitoring will do that. And choose one. A single source off light illuminates, go to step 3. Source off lights, both, go to step 5. We're going to go with scenario number 1, which is both source off lights extinguish. Yaw damper switch on, go to step 17. Step 17, both the captain's and first officer's primary attitude displays are operative, and the attitude flags are not shown. End of checklist. That's one scenario, and it's done step by step. All right, let's go to scenario number 2. Again, reading the title the way I mentioned it, and speaking of the condition, just the way we did before. I won't repeat myself, but step number 1, engine generator switches both on one at a time. We always do everything left to right in Boeing airplanes, left to right, top to bottom. So do it that way, one at a time. Choose one. In this case, a single source off light stays illuminated. We'll go to step 3. Okay. Step number 3, yaw damper switch on. Choose one. APU is available for start or APU is not. We're going to pick the option APU is available for start. Note, APU start attempts are not recommended above 25,000 feet. Now remember, we talked about that before, and if you try to start the APU, each time you do, you're going to drain the battery of a certain amount of power, perhaps up to 6 minutes. APU start. When APU is running, APU gen switch affected side on. And go to step 17. Choose one. Both the captain and first officer's primary attitude displays are operative and attitude flags are not shown. End of checklist. Let's go to scenario number 3. The situation where both source off lights stay illuminated. Go to step 5. Now we're getting into a little more complicated because you made the attempt and both source off lights are illuminated. Choose one. APU is available for start. Bus transfer switch off. The electrical hydraulic pump switches both off. APU start attempts are not recommended above flight level 250. With both buses off, only one start attempt is recommended. Very important. Only one start attempt because of that power drainage. Multiple starts reduce standby power capacity by a lot. If, let's say, you tried 3 times, you're losing 18 minutes, more than half of the power remaining. And you've got to get to an airport. So meanwhile, while you're doing this, incidentally, you're going at probably high speed to the nearest suitable airport, and you're declaring a mayday. A mayday, mayday. This is serious. All right, APU start. Go to step 6. When the APU is running, generator control switches on one at a time. Now, if, depending on your aircraft, if you have a remote control circuit breaker, check it. And remote control circuit breaker is tripped, then reset the breaker, only one reset. This is one of the very few times in a Boeing airplane where you're going to actually go through resetting a circuit breaker. And you only do it if the checklist tells you at the time it tells you in the checklist. So go to step 9, only one reset. A single or both source off lights extinguished. Go to step 10. Bus transfer switch is auto. The electrical hydraulic pump switch is both on, one at a time. Yaw damper switch on and plan to land at the nearest suitable airport. Only one AC power source remains. Now you've already decided that. When you lost both generators, you immediately pointed the airplane. You don't want to take any chances. And remember, you've got a maximum of 30 minutes on a single battery. Maximum. So you've got to get that airplane on the ground. Go to step 17. And as we said before, if both captains and first officers' primary attitude displays are operative and attitude flags are not shown, end of checklist. Now, if they were, both the captain and first officer's primary attitude displays are failed, you would go to step 19 and you would carry out what they recommend. I put the little insert here from the FCOM with respect to the IRS mode selectors both off and attitude so that you can get a reinstate the magnetic heading. And you follow this checklist. This little picture will help you think about where everything is. Everybody forgets about the IRSs. We get on the airplane and we power them up and then we forget about them. Very, very important because they're giving you your track bar or your track line on both NDs. And remember we talked about raw data being the cake? Ah, that's the cake. All right, let's go now to the last scenario. Both source, off, light, stay illuminated, go to step 5. So let's say we do that. And when we went to step 5, APU is not available for whatever reason. Maybe you were dispatched with it inoperable. Go to step 14 and avoid icing conditions. Flight and icing conditions can result in erroneous flight instrument indications. Remember what we saw on what's available and what's not available. Plan to land at the nearest suitable airport. You've already done something about that under airmanship a long time ago. The right IRS will operate on DC power for 5 minutes. So both the captain's and first officer's primary attitude displays, let's say, are failed. If they are, you go to step 19. And at step 19 again brings you through the procedure of the resetting the heading according to this checklist. So this is something that you don't want to rush, but I strongly recommend that you proceed to a suitable airport while you're doing this. It's very important. If you want further briefings on any information, my information's at the top of the screen. Get your partner together. We'll Zoom before you go into your sim session with your instructor. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video.